it's Jenny Dang. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. It's been way too long and we're going to make a circle skirt by using your waist measurement. And this is a no equations tutorial. There's plenty of tutorials showing you the equations to use, and I mainly just follow this chart. You do need to know your waist size, and I would use a measuring tape and measure where I'm wearing my belt and measure along here. It's kind of above your belly button. It's where you're bending naturally. That's where your natural waist size is. So you want that number, and then we're going to follow the chart and see how to make a circle skirt. What inspired this project was seeing this picture of Maria Feliz. I love this skirt and I found a similar fabric. When I first started sewing, I didn't know how to make a circle skirt, and I used tutorials that I found on YouTube. So I hope I could add to the information out there, and hopefully I can make something, less confusing. All right, so let's get started. Bring out those measuring tapes. It's time to get started. So you measure around your waist, and mine comfortably is a 26. Then you want pattern paper. Well, I was going to say you could buy it at Joann's. I guess you could find it at your local hobby store, but I use old Christmas wrapping paper. I like in the back that it's gridded so you could get straight lines. So from your measurement, let's look at the chart. I placed a heart where there's 26 inches, and that middle row is the inches line. So on your ruler, you want to find 4 1/8 of it, and then that's how you're going to mark it. And I don't know if this is common knowledge, but I sure did not know how to find 1/8 on on the ruler. So I did find that, and I'm going to put it up here, and I also linked that in the description because that was so helpful. So that's what you're going to mark on your measuring tape, and try to mark it on the corner. That way all the markings are correct. So you're just basically making a half of a circle. When we place it on the fold of the fabric, it's going to fold out to one panel of the skirt. So this is just making the pattern for the front of the skirt, and then you'll use the same one for the back. Our markings are our seam line, so that's how we're going to sew it together from that line. So you want to add seam allowance from there, and I use 1/2 of a seam allowance. So when we cut it out, you're not going to make it smaller or larger. It's going to equal to your waist size. So first marking is your seam line, and that's where you're going to sew. Okay, and then cut it out, and I always just write it down just in case I forget. So that is your seam allowance. And from here, you just want to cut out the excess. Now for the hem, it's totally up to you. I like my skirts long, so I usually cut around 28 inches. So I start from the seam line, so under the seam allowance, and I measure up to 28 inches. I'm currently making a skirt that's 22 inches, and it's really, really shorter from what I'm used to, but that's what I love about making your own patterns, is that you could make it however long or short that you want. And it just gives you so much control with trying to rely on stores to buy something when you could just make it yourself. Saves money too. You don't have to buy a pattern. As long as you have your measurements, you could draft one out. Before I start on the fabric, I always do a little test to just double check the waist size. And what I do is I take my measuring tape and I follow along the seam allowance where that's going to be the stitching line, and just follow it along like this, just going along the line where the stitching would be, and would end at 6.5. So 6.5 times 2, that is 13. So 13 plus 13 is 26, which is the waist size for a 26 inch. So always just do a little test to make sure before you cut on the pretty fabric. I rather just do a little test, especially for my customers. I always just want to triple check that my math is correct. This is the pretty fabric we'll be using, a serape print I found at my local fabric store. At least with Joann's closing, it's gonna incentivize people finding their local fabric store, but I know it's not possible in most areas. I know most have to buy and order online for their fabric, but if it is possible, I would just see what your local fabric store has to offer. Remember to cut out two for the front and back of the skirt. So I pinned both of the sides together of the skirt. There's lots of ways to close this. I could do a French seam, but I want to do a regular stitch and then close the raw edges with bias tape. And I will show you how I did a French seam in a card. And so this is how another way you could close up your seams and have it look really pretty on the inside. I sew the sides together and then I use this double fold bias tape from Mandela Crafts. I really like it. It's kind of a thick material, but it does the job. I sew that down and I do the same thing on the other side so all the raw edges are encased in this double fold bias tape. To draft the waistband, I use a 4.5 width with a 30-inch in length strip of fabric, and I cut that down and place it on the top of the skirt for the waistband. Forgive me, I forgot to add footage of ironing the waistband first, so I do that first before I sew it to the skirt. And before I fold over the waistband, I do snips along the waist, so it relieves some tension around the waist fabric. And for the zipper, I do my zippers and I sew it along the bias tape. I think this is a sneaky or another way of doing an invisible zipper, or it's probably a lazy way of doing it. But I do like that the seams don't show along the side, so it's kind of like a different way of doing an invisible zipper. So we sew that down, and it is kind of tricky on the top. So, usually you would use a different foot for this, but I was feeling lazy at the time. I didn't feel like switching up the zipper foot, so I used my regular sewing foot and just took my time doing the top, moved the zipper down, and then finishing out the top of the zipper. Once both sides of the zipper is sewn, I fold down my waistband and I tuck in the seam allowance on the inside. I sew down the excess where the closure would be on the skirt, and then I flip it over. Well, not flip it, but just switch it over so I could do a top stitch all around the skirt. It's called stitch in the ditch. So you stitch in between where the waistband and the skirt connect. And I do that until the other side of the opening of the skirt. From here, you're basically done. You just have to add a closure. You can add a decorative button to open up from the zipper, or I like to use these type of closures on my skirts. And then you lastly have to hem it. Don't forget to hem. And then here is the finished project, all based on seeing a picture from Maria Feliz. It looked like a serape print to me, so I wanted to recreate it in the fabric that I found. It is very swishy. It's mandatory to do some twirly walks when you're wearing a circle skirt. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. I would love to help in any way, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.